What's up, everybody? I'm Logan Moody. This is the Contrarian channel where I like to talk about everything investing, the markets, and how to find good opportunities out there in the markets where other people aren't necessarily looking. Today, I will be talking about a very well-known contrarian investor out there. You've probably heard of him, Michael Burry. He's very famous for being featured in The Big Short, predicting things that have occurred very recently, like GameStop, a lot of the issues surrounding COVID. And he recently released a pretty bombshell tweet with regards to China, Taiwan, ongoing inflationary expectations that he has. I'll just dive into it really quick, but it's a very significant tweet. Now, Michael Burry, he's not very into doing in-person interviews, but he does put his thoughts out on Twitter. And so I like to keep my eye on what he's thinking because as he's been correct in the past, there's a good chance he'll be correct in the future in terms of his thinking process, the process by which he does his analysis, etc. So without further ado, I'll dive into this tweet he just released a few hours ago about a lot of topics. Very dense tweet, just to put it blankly. So Michael Burry says, seems China moves on Taiwan in 2023 as the war in Ukraine spreads into the EU, maybe via Lithuania. Onshoring and blue-collar shortages plus global supply chain restructuring raise long-term inflation's floor even as the bullwhip cycle lower to that end. So there's a lot in this tweet, and Michael Burry even linked an article saying how the U.S. factory and industrial boom is continuing as manufacturers are pulling their supply chains out of China, reshoring them to the U.S. Now that's good news for the U.S. economy, at least part of the U.S. economy, but there's a lot else that goes along with this reshoring of the supply chain, and that seems to play into Michael Burry's thesis that inflation, the long-term inflationary floor, as he puts it, will be raised significantly by this happening. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out, that if you reshore jobs from China, bring it back to the U.S., not only are you having to build new factories and everything from the ground up, but you're also having to deal with a lot more labor compliance than you were in China, much higher costs of labor, things like that, for a while the U.S. was able to get away with in China, getting a lot more affordable, cheap labor in China and other Asian countries. But it appears that Burry thinks that China moves on Taiwan in 2023. Now, why could that be? There's potentially a lot of reasons out there why Michael Burry sees China moving on Taiwan in 2023. It could be the increasing pressure the Chinese military is pushing up against the Taiwan itself, essentially kind of what Putin was doing with Ukraine before he officially invaded Ukraine. Michael Burry might be thinking that China is acting in a similar manner. Eventually they'll go ahead and move into Taiwan itself. But it also could be that China is effectively watching the EU and Russia, everything going on with Russia and Ukraine right now, and effectively, weighing the pros and cons of them moving into Taiwan or not. And unfortunately, Russia has been very successful in terms of winning in Ukraine. That's not the official mainstream news narrative out there, but from all intents and purposes, whether it's the long-standing Ukraine army that has just been decimated by Russian troops, whether it's from a commodities standpoint of Europe hurting itself long-term by relying on Russia for its commodities, particularly oil and gas. Now Russia really using that to its own benefit to pressure Europe into effectively folding and then effectively not really having any sort of sanctioning power against Russia. So there's a lot there, but it's likely that China is watching what Russia has done recently with Ukraine and is perhaps considering taking Taiwan. That might be what Michael Burry's thinking. But also, Michael Burry is effectively saying that even though inflation has come down a little bit, it's likely to come down a little bit because of the bullwhip effect, effectively with all of the large amounts of inventories that are out there, whether it's car dealers, whether it's home sellers, whether it is just simply consumer retailers out there. There's a lot of inventory levels out there that are very bloated this is effectively the bullwhip effect, where even with higher prices, high inflation, you can temporarily have a disinflationary forces just with the inventory levels needing to be sold off, where effectively all of these sellers of these goods need to effectively try to get rid of them for whatever price they can be sold at. And me personally, I actually just recently went on a vacation to California. It was very insightful doing that for me just in the last week, in terms of seeing how much the prices of airline tickets, of everything else that goes along with the vacation, have come down. You know, prior to me going on this trip, an airline ticket out there might have cost around 400, 500 bucks. I ended up getting it for just under 300 bucks. So prices have come down very dramatically out there. So it's very correct that Michael Burry points this out. The bullwhip effect is going to bring inflation down in the short term, but in the long term, just simply with the reshoring of the supply chain more back to the United States, maybe other Western nations, the floor of inflation, so what can be kind of expected as a base case for inflation, has definitely been raised and likely will be raised going onward into the future. So this is a very dense tweet that Michael Burry just released. He talked about China and Taiwan. He talked about the bullwhip cycle temporarily bringing inflation down. As he did in a previous tweet, he talked about the reshoring of the supply chain, the implications of that as we continue to deal with the supply chain crisis, as it has been, so much more broad than we originally thought it would be. But that could have been predicted with shutting everything down during COVID. As Michael Burry was saying back then, it's just practically impossible to restart everything in the same manner as it was prior to shutting it all down. So with all of this being said, let me know what you guys think down in the comments about Michael Burry's tweets that he's just put out there. Do you think that he's correct in what he says about China and Taiwan and about inflation going onwards? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. If you liked this channel, just consider subscribing if you want to hear more. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, give it a thumbs down. Let me know why down in the comment section below. And I hope to see you guys all again at some point.